Hey everyone, we've been taking a look at the Reformation and the Northern Renaissance and some of the major influences that are bringing about these changes. And today I want to take a look at art that is after the Reformation and see how these changes have started to impact art. And some of the major changes are going to be the church is no longer going to be funding art, and so artists are going to have to find other means to be able to find financial support to buy their art, and they're also going to be removing religious iconography within their works of art, and so you're going to see a removal of saints and angels from the art. It's going to be much more about common, ordinary, daily events rather than focusing on overt religious iconography. But that's not to suggest that their art doesn't have religious iconography or messages within them. We'll kind of pull them apart and take a look at how they're doing that. But let's take a look at Chronic the Elder. He was a German painter and printmaker. He's normally known for his graceful figures with vivid colors. He's mainly influenced by the ideas of humanism, and he shows detailed landscapes and backgrounds. Uses symbolism and allegory, and his workshop produced works of art for over 80 years. But they all emphasize this idea of Protestantism, the changes that are happening. He lived in Wittenberg, which was the epicenter of the Reformation. This is where Martin Luther's ideas come about. It's where he nailed the 95 Theses to the cathedral door. Cranach became familiar with the ideas of the Reformation and had to adapt his art accordingly. With his two sons, he had the largest workshop in Europe, and they produced 5,000 paintings in that 80-year period, and they dominated the art market. Cranach was a court painter for the wealthy. But what he's also going to do as a printmaker, he makes his art more accessible to regular people who can't afford to have unique paintings or sculptures. They can't afford that. That printing makes it much more accessible to everyone. Here we see the Judgment of Paris. This comes from the story that begins the Trojan War. Zeus hosted a wedding celebration for a minor goddess who helped him in a plot to overthrow him, and so he throws a wedding as kind of a payback favor to her. He invites everyone on Olympus to come but one person, Eris, the goddess of mischief and strife. Eris crashes the wedding anyway. She says, hey, no problem, no hard feelings. And to show that I bear no hard feelings, I give you this golden apple, and I'm going to give it to the fairest goddess on Olympus. Well, this caused a major stir among the goddesses, and they started fighting. Zeus is the enforcer of justice, stability, and order, and so he doesn't like people arguing. And so he intervenes and throws the apple off of Mount Olympus, and it falls to the earth and at the feet of Paris, who is just kind of sitting under a tree, right? And then three goddesses immediately appear to him and promise him favors if they receive the apple. Hera, or Juno, is the wife of Zeus and generally known for her maternal qualities, and what she does, she promises him to be the ruler over all of Asia Minor, so all of the area of Greece and the surrounding area. Athena, who's also one of the goddesses, or Minerva, is also another name she's known by, promises it to make him the wisest man in the whole world. And Venus says, step aside, you guys are amateurs. Venus, or Aphrodite, promises to give him the object of his love, right? So he gives the apple to Venus, right? And the other two are extremely upset by this, but now Paris and Venus have this kind of connection. Meanwhile, Paris's father, named as Priam, sends Paris on a diplomatic mission to Sparta to make an alliance with the Greeks. At dinner, he sees Menelaus' wife Helen, and he falls instantly in love with her, right? But there's a problem. She's the queen of the king of Sparta, Menelaus. Menelaus says, you know what? I have this ace up my sleeve. I'm going to contact Venus and see if he can help me escape with Helen. So she does. He runs off with her in the middle of the night. Menelaus wakes up the next morning and sees Paris is gone. And then he starts looking around and he realizes that Helen is gone, and he starts to connect the dots. And then he goes to his brother, who is the king of all the Greeks, Agamemnon, to try to get her back, right? So there's a big problem within Greek tradition that if you are accepting a guest, you need to be able to accept them, otherwise there's a problem. And if you do accept them and that person offends you, then that's a even bigger problem. And so since Paris was welcomed by Menelaus as a visitor, and then he runs off with his wife, that is something that is a defiance of order and good taste. And so the Greeks go off and to get Helen back and to sack Troy. And so this is the moment that launches 1,000 ships to conquer Troy, and then a 10-year war ensues. Right. So this is this shows kind of an interesting influence of humanism in the North. Right. So we see this ancient Greek poem and the study of humanism going back to older ideas, ancient Roman and Greek ideas, and bringing them forward. And so we see the influence of humanism traveling to the north. And Wittenberg had a newly minted, newly established university that was recruiting the best and the brightest minds of humanism. And so humanism was on the rise in the north, and we can see that influence in the judgment of Paris. This is a religious, it is a religious image here, but it's different from the other religious images that we're going to see in the Counter-Reformation. On the left panel, seen here, just kind of going through the actual overall, kind of looks like an altarpiece. On the left panel is of a reformer performing a baptism, right? It's kind of the new baptism under this new kind of era. And then the right panel is a wealthy person during confessionals. And so they keep some elements of Catholicism. This is still kind of new and they're kind of figuring it out. But it's to show real people doing real religious things rather than saints doing religious things. And then we're kind of, they seem like they're high above humanity. This is about human beings, actual people doing actual religious things. In the Last Supper and the center panel, which you see a detail of, Cranach puts the face of Luther holding a beer, right, receiving a beer from the artist Cranach, serving the beer. And so this is about personal connections. This is not just about regular people who are invited into the sacred conversation to witness something. It's about regular people being a part of the sacred conversation and being a part of the scene. And so here, regular people are seen as apostles and being able to be invited into the Last Supper with Christ, right? So the ideas of mysticism suggest that anyone can have this spiritual experience. It's about our individual relationship with God. Luther builds upon these ideas where we can simply need to connect with God and the Word of God. We just need to have the Bible and faith. Cranach reinforces this by putting people of his day within a holy context. They're not just visually separated that we see with Leonardo's Last Supper, where we're invited in to witness it, but there is that table that separates us, and so it's more like we're in the audience of this kind of sacred play that is happening in the New Testament. We're kind of can witness it, but there's that separation. But here he's kind of inviting common people, everyday people, in, which is pretty typical of Protestant ideas. Here we see this is what we see that Cranach is mainly known for, is his printmaking, making these ideas more accessible, right? So as we have a couple of things that are happening simultaneously during the Renaissance. We have printmaking, which is making the words, books more accessible. We have people that, like Luther, that's translating the Bible into common everyday language. He's translating it into German, making that more accessible to people. And at the same time, we have the development of printmaking, which is making art more accessible. And so all these ideas are becoming it just seems like a fury, kind of this fervor of ideas, very similar to some of the transitions that we see with the development of the internet, right? So the ideas are much more accessible, and it seems like learning is on the rise. Like Durer, Cranach was a master of prints, and so it was this kind of time of excitement and knowledge, and people had more access to it than ever before. Here we see Cranach reveals two different faiths. On the left-hand side, we see the Catholic faith, and on the right-hand side, we see the Protestant faith, right? On the left is a Catholic who is stained by original sin. Original sin is when Adam partook of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. He caused everyone of his descendants to have this original sin that separates us from God. Catholics focus on law And because there's that focus on law, there's this feeling that we will never measure up to the lofty ideals. And so he puts Moses here with the 2 tablets. These are the laws to remind people, pointing where people have failed. And then you have these skeletons and demons that are causing this pain upon humanity, suggesting that they will never measure up to all of the ideals, all the laundry list of things that people have to do during the day to be considered, quote unquote, a good Catholic. They're not going to measure up. And so we see these people over here that are burning. We see the original sin over here with Adam and Eve, and then the serpent that's around them, tempting them. And then we have God on the throne, which we've seen before, and then John the Baptist and Mary, and then angels that surround them. They're kind of looking on, but they feel quite distant. That the idea is that we can never make it back. All right. So the argument is that Catholicism suggests that it's going to be extremely difficult to make it, if not impossible, to make it back to God. On the left, we see a different type of image. And so you can think about how this is also used as kind of a quasi-propaganda. What we see is a Lutheran who is bathed in the divine blood of Christ here on a cross. There's a spear wound in his side causing it to bleed, and then it bleeds, I guess, on the dove, who then sanctifies that blood and gives it to everyone. And so through Christ, we're able to receive the heavenly manifestations of sanctification through the Holy Ghost, right? And so then we see these angels coming down, blowing trumpets. I suppose this is perhaps Mary. I'm not really sure. Don't quote me on that one. We see the Lamb holding the cross. And so again, another symbol of Christ. Christ emerging victoriously from the tomb with the spear wounds in his side, right? Showing this conquering over death. And he steps on death and sin, or the devil here, stepping on them, showing his victory over it. And then we have, I guess, what appears to be the Israelites that are sick and they're afflicted, and they had to look upon the brass serpent to be healed. And so again, this idea of healing through the word of Christ, through our faith. And so the idea here is that through the word, through our faith, that we can be redeemed. But if we're only focusing on laws and what we're not measuring up to, we're never going to make it, right? So it seems like this is a much more depressing. So the idea is that this is where you really want to go. This is much more uplifting and hopeful. And so this is a subtle shot, or maybe not so subtle shot, at Catholicism. Beldung was a student of Durr and learned the skills of prints and printmaking. What we see here is something that's typical of Northern Renaissance art, in that it conveys a religious message without it having anything overtly religious about it. So it's not about the Last Supper, and it's not about Adam and Eve. This is just about an ordinary kind of day-to-day person. And so, but even though it's about an everyday ordinary person, it still has a moral or a message to it, right? This man was lured by fantasies and a trick of fame. He was lured into this by this witch that's up in the window on the top right-hand side. And she's kind of laughing at him. And so he's kind of went to the witch hoping that she would help him with fame and whatever else. But he was lulled into complacency, and he dropped his guard. And then the witch stole his life, right? So she kind of stole his life by whacking the horse, and then the horse kicked him and then killed him immediately dead. It seems like the horse is pretty grouchy about being whipped too. But it shows an interesting commentary about what happens when we do lose our guard. So the focus of Protestantism is about our individual connection with God. And if we lose that individual connection, this is what could happen, right? But it also shows an interesting commentary about womanhood. Men need to be on guard from the wiles of women. They can be seductive and overpower men, causing them to kind of lead them to their destruction. So we're going to see that as a major theme. We're mainly going to see that it's going to become more prominent when we get to the Baroque era, the next century, right? Hans Holbein. He's a German painter. He focused on realism and precision, very neutral backgrounds generally, and he worked for wealthy patrons. And he generally has elegant compositions and a very heavy social and political commentary. But he uses a lot of symbolism that's reinforced by the Reformation and the ideas of Protestantism. He was trained in humanism. And he became a friend to another northern humanist, Erasmus, and we talked about his ideas before in terms of just praying. All we need is the word of God. Basel in Switzerland was where he was at the time, clamped down on religious imagery, and so he left to find work elsewhere. And so as the Protestantism starts to pick up, we talked about how they start turning away from religious images and art itself, and they see art as a kind of this false idols, and they want to remove them. And so he travels to France and works for Francis the First. We've talked about him before. And then he later goes to England to work for Henry VIII in 1527. And he comes to England with a letter of introduction from Erasmus to another scholar, Thomas More, who lives in England. And so these Northern humanist ideas are kind of sharing their thoughts, and they're coming together, and they're influencing art. Erasmus wrote to Thomas More, quote, "Here in Basel, art is out in the cold." And so the idea is that please take this guy in. He's a great artist. Here, artists are not being accepted, and it's just a time of transformation and uncertainty, and it's really affecting the art world. Erasmus later complained about mobs destroying art. He said, quote, "Not a statue has been left in the churches or in the monasteries. All frescoes have been washed over. Everything which would be burned has been set afire. Everything else hacked into little pieces. Neither value nor artistry prevailed to save anything." And so it didn't matter how much it was or who made it. It was all going to be destroyed. But in England, Holbein found patrons and merchants and diplomats. On the left is Jean de Danteville, who is a wealthy ambassador from France. The globes on the table on the top and the bottom reflect his exploratory spirit. The bottom globe is a globe of the world, and the top is a globe of the stars. And so it shows these kind of eternal or celestial and the physical world coming together, exploring the idea of science, technology, right? Bishop Georges de Salve is a friend and also an ambassador, and he's on the right. He has a passion for music, which is noted in the lute, which kind of looks like this guitar-shaped, kind of weirdly guitar-shaped instrument. And then in front of this, of the lute, is Luther's hymn book. Together they represent the things of the world. These are the studies of the arts and the sciences. These are what help us to find meaning in the world. Studying them help us to understand who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. However, the skull at the very center, if you guys notice the skull here, that's kind of askew right there, that reminds us of death, right? So the idea here is that, yes, we need to study art, yes, we need to study science, and they do help us to find meaning in the world, and they help us to understand who we are. However, we need to remember that there are things of greater worth. The skull is center stage, and in the upper left-hand corner, there's a subtle crucifix that the curtain subtly reveals here to remind us of having religious faith and religious ideas. So it suggests that there are limits to humanity's knowledge, and we need to have that humility as well, right? But notice that these are not of saints. They're just of noble or influential people. Denteville holds a dagger, and Salve holds a book, kind of has his elbow on the book. This represents the active and contemplative life. Interestingly, though, the floor that they stand on is the same floor that is in the Westminster Abbey, and so he places them within the Westminster Abbey, places them within the context of the church, even though they're celebrating human development, science, arts, understanding, suggesting that these are important, celebrating diplomats, celebrating other figures that are going around the world, to, focus on coming together and the coming together of humanity. Artisan was a Dutch painter, and he focuses on kitchen and market scenes that have naturalistic details. Generally has a strong sense of lighting and very complex compositions, as you see here. But there's a moralizing theme that's influenced by the Reformation, right? He was in Antwerp, and with the rising religious changes, he has to change his art. And so here we see a subtle religious image. And so here we see that kind of subtle shifting in Northern Renaissance art. It is subdued and takes some unpacking to understand. In the upper kind of center of the image, this is Mary and Jesus and Joseph and their flight into Egypt after Caesar declares that all children should be killed. And here she is handing bread to those passing by, giving them the sacrament, giving them sustaining life, focusing on her devotion to helping others. On the right is a scene from a tavern where you have this this worker here who goes out and gets a bucket of water, and he's surrounded by oyster shells. And the oyster shells are thought to be an aphrodisiac, which is a symbol of secular love. And so the idea here is it gives us kind of this scene of we could either focus on our religious life or we can focus on the pleasures of the world. The choice is ours, right? So we have to really focus on who we are and our own individual relationship rather than focusing on the needs or the deeds, I should say, of others. In the meat stall, there are two fishes that make a cross, which is a symbol of Christianity, and the pretzels are what people eat during Lent. And so again, these are subtle references to Christianity and doing things that are religious, that put us in that connection with God. The meat stall also demonstrates the industrious life. We should focus on being industrious rather than being idle, because idle hands are the devil's play toy. And so it does have that moralizing theme to it, even though it's subtle. If we just take a look at this, we might just think that it's about a meat stall, nothing really major. But there are these hidden messages in there that are trying to direct people back to religious ideas, right? So trying to convert them subtly. But again, this is not going to be in an altar piece where someone's going to go and pray to it. It's just about a message that teaches and instructs, and that's what a lot of art is. Taking a look at Bruegel the Elder. He was a Flemish painter, meaning he comes from modern-day Belgium, the Netherlands area, and he mainly represents genre scenes, which are scenes of everyday life. He also focuses on landscapes, and they generally have naturalistic detail and perspective. He generally paints festivals, everyday activities of common people. His works are going to have this narrative complexity to them. There's going to be a lot of objects that are happening simultaneously, but there's always going to be some type of allegory or moralizing themes that highlights human folly. It's going to have some type of humoristic quality to it, but also going to have that moralizing theme is going to connect it to the Reformation. That there's no kind of overt religious imagery. It's all going to be normal everyday scenes, but scenes that are going to lead and instruct people back towards religion. This particular work of art was one of the panels painted for a wealthy merchant who asked Bruegel to make 6 panels for him. So again, the patrons of the arts are starting to change from like we see with the Medicis or the Catholic Church. These are just becoming, wealthy merchants. They're not political leaders necessarily. They're not religious leaders. They're just regular people wanting art to fill their homes and to convey a very subtle religious message. But the 6 panels were going to be deep winter, as we see here, early spring, early summer, late summer, and autumn. Here the hunters returning from their hunt. They only have one rabbit, though, one kind of measly rabbit that they have caught, and so they've really struggled. This is about the struggles of winter. So they're tired, they're unsuccessful. The footprints kind of show where they've been in their kind of painful march forward. But this is about the daily routine, the daily grind. And sometimes it's going to be challenging. Sometimes it's going to be difficult, but we're going to have to rise above that. The landscape gives meaning to the people within it. Notice how the landscape is similar to the importance of landscapes within Durer's work. However, Durer's work shows only the landscapes. This one, the landscape does dominate because it's the biggest element of the canvas, but the human qualities do demonstrate some type of importance on human life and human activities, right? People here are playing and interacting below, right? They're on the ice, they're playing, they're interacting. This is a celebration of human life. It's fun and gives us many kind of narratives and opportunities to connect. It is different from the Italian Renaissance that focuses on ideal, great, important, significant moments such as the Annunciation, such as an important saint or something of that nature. This is a mundane moment. This is ordinary, right? There's nothing, interestingly also, there's nothing of this landscape in Flanders. Flanders is known as the Low Country. It's getting us closer to the ocean. And so there's no mountains that are there, no mountain region. So this shows Bruegel's travels to Italy and crossing the Alps, and he kind of brings these ideas back. And so again, this cultural exchange of going to Italy and bringing the ideas back up north. But the landscape feels harsh and cold. but the flurry of human activity seems to warm the scene. And this is just a couple of details of the people down below that are just enjoying their day. Life can be about fun. It doesn't always have to be about work and hardships. But there are those components to it, right? There are people that are out there working, and that also is an important part of life. And so life is complex, and let's celebrate its complexity. But in comparison to the Italian Renaissance, where we see with Raphael's The School of Athens about important people, Aristotle, Plato, Diogenes, Pythagoras, right? All these important people, Raphael, Michelangelo, are center stage that shows an important moment of important people. This is just showing people that are ordinary people just doing ordinary things. And so that transition, that's kind of a different kind of feel that we're seeing within the Northern Renaissance. And this just shows that connection of what Dürer brings back north with him, that's going to influence other artists, right? So they start saying, you know what, the landscape, that is an important kind of image. Maybe I can implement that a little bit more. This one, again, shows a different focus and a shifting away from kings and martyrs and saints and all of that. This is just known as the peasant wedding. And this is just a genre painting. Genre painting just means a painting of everyday life. And we see a shifting away from the patrons of the church or the Medicis, just landscapes, genres, genre paintings, and still lifes, and that's it. What we see here is that this is a sacrament, even though Luther says, he's kind of leery of sacraments. There are a couple of sacraments that are important. Baptism, the Eucharist, or a sacrament, weddings, ceremonies. There are important ceremonies that Protestants do still maintain. One of them is weddings, right? So this is a wedding ceremony, but it's not taking place within a church. It's the celebration afterwards. But people are coming together. So again, this is a celebration of life, right? The bride is at the center in the back, right? We kind of see her kind of being encased within this curtain here. So she's here, and we have no idea where the groom is. Somewhere in there. But he's not really a big focus. And the focus is not necessarily even on the bride, even though she's at the center. It's about the people, right? Coming together in ordinary things. And so in some ways, this becomes a cultural document. In a similar way to Dürer's study of nature, Bruegel studies culture. What is important to us, what we value. This is what we do. It is the sharing of humanity. It's about our togetherness, right? So this is kind of like a still life of the 16th century, right? But it's a still life of humans, right? Still lifes are generally about fruit or flowers or something like that, where it's just showing kind of a moment in time. This is kind of a moment in time. This kind of gives us, we're invited to share their world and peer into what was important to them. And a couple of detailed images. I like this one over here. He's just kind of like this bowl of porridge or whatever they're eating is empty. He's like, please, sir, I want some more. Or this lady here is getting another refill here. So it's just kind of people coming together and showing this kind of togetherness of what is important about humanity. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a church. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a pope or with a bishop or something of that nature, cardinal, whatever. It can just be ordinary people doing ordinary things, and that can transcend into something great, right? Humanity doesn't necessarily have to be doing always great things. And this one is a kind of a moralizing image. This one comes from the New Testament in the Scriptures, where it says, the blind that leadeth the blind, surely they both fall down into a pit. That's probably a poor paraphrase of the Scripture, but that's the gist of it. And so here we see that there's a church in the background, so that's somewhat religious, and then the religious message of the blind that are going from town to town with the sticks, right? So one would hold one stick and the other one would hold the shoulder, and that was how they would kind of move around. But ideally, someone would be in the front that would be leading them. But here, the blind person is leading the blind. And so we know that what happened to this person is going to happen to all of them. And so even though this is not a representation of saints or angels or something of that nature, these just look like common everyday people, it does have that moralizing quality that we do need to think about where we're at. We do need to think about what we do. We do need to have that kind of focus. And so again, this isn't going to be for some in some church or something. This is just for wealthy patrons that can pay for it, to help remind them as a teaching instruction, putting it in their house or their office building, to show what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. And so if you put this in an office building, you're trying to show people that you're trying to live a virtuous life, and so you can be quote unquote trusted. And so different kind of changes that are happening in the North. The North is not as overt and heavy-handed in their religious messages. They're much more subtle, and they're not necessarily focusing on big shots within the church. They're just focusing on common everyday people, and so it shows some of those transitions of what's happening within the Northern Reformation, how the Reformation, this larger religious social event, is influencing art and influencing artists and how they perceive the world and what they're actually representing.